Welcome to Session 9 of our study of Mark's Gospel. I'm Pastor Doug Bronner, one of the pastors at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado. We're going to look at Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 28 today, and specifically talk about the Sabbath. Before we do that, though, I have a couple of housekeeping things I want to take care of, and then I'll start my timer. First of all, I'm going to take a week break. So the next video will come out 2 weeks from when this one posts. But we will have our Zoom meeting on July 7th, 7 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time. And if you'd like to be a part of that Zoom meeting and go over chapter 2 again, send me an email. The information will be on a slide at the end of this video. And then once you tell me you want to be a part of that study, I will then send you an invite to that Zoom meeting. The last one we had, the first part of June, was great, and I look forward to doing it again. Okay, time to start the timer. So let's talk about the Sabbath. I hope you did your pre-class work, pre-video work, as I had some Bible passages for you to look up. And so the student guide, if you don't know where that is, if you go below this video and in the description in YouTube, and you click in that description, you'll see a link in there for the student guide. You can click on that link and print up the study guide, student guide, and get into it. So it'll be helpful for you to do that pre-class work. In that pre-video work, I had you look at Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. God has finished creating, right? He's finished that work of creation at the 6 days, and behold, it was very good. And on the seventh day, God rests. Not because he's tired, but because God enjoys what he's made. And he invites you and I, the readers, the hearers of the story, to join in that joy of creation with him. Now, just a little point of information for you here. You'll notice in the days of creation, they went, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1, day 2, whatever it was. For the Jewish person, the Sabbath begins at sundown on Friday, and then it concludes at sundown on Saturday. So it covers a part of Friday, and most of Saturday would be considered the Sabbath. And in Jesus' day, that was true as well. I had you look up another passage, and that's from Exodus chapter 20, where we have the giving of the command to keep the Sabbath day holy. And you saw there that God connected it back to creation again. Okay, so let's jump well ahead to Jesus' day, to the religious leaders in Jesus' day. The religious leaders had a whole tradition around the Sabbath. You see, when we focus on the law, we're always concerned about the line. And what is that line? The line that says, on this side of the line, I'm keeping that law. However, if I step across the law, then I'm disobeying that command. And when we live by the law, we're always drawing lines to know when we're being obedient and when we're being disobedient. And the Pharisees and the religious leaders of Jesus' day had all these traditions around the Sabbath that they had developed that say this is when you're keeping the Sabbath, and this is when you're breaking the Sabbath. This is when you're not keeping it holy, and this is when you're keeping it holy, and this is when you're not keeping the Sabbath day holy. And that tradition that they had built up around the Sabbath had the same authority as the command of God himself to keep the day holy. So if I broke a tradition of the elders, I was breaking the commandment of God. It had the same amount of authority. And that's important for you to understand as we dig now into the text for today. Again, Mark chapter 2, verses 23 through 28. And Mark tells us what's happening, right? That Jesus' disciples are walking through a grain field, plucking the grain and eating that grain. And it happens to be on a Sabbath day. Now, we might think that they're breaking the law against stealing. How can they go into somebody else's field and eat the grain that they didn't raise? Well, God provided for people and said you can do that. That was permissible. You find that in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 23 and verses 24 through 25 of Deuteronomy 23 talks about the fact that they were allowed to eat the grain. They just couldn't put a sickle to it. They couldn't harvest their neighbor's grain. That would be stealing. But if you're hungry and you're passing through your neighbor's grain field, it was very permissible to pluck the grain, to rub your hands together and then eat that grain, which is what the disciples were doing. And the Pharisees were not commenting about them stealing and breaking God's command, but they were breaking the Sabbath because the work that they were doing was not permissible on the Sabbath. Now, they may have drawn that from Exodus 34, verse 21, where again on the Sabbath day, God commands that they weren't to harvest. Even during harvest season, they weren't to do any work on that day. And so we're drawing lines again, right? And in the tradition of the elders, the line was drawn at, even if you rubbed your hands together, plucked grain, rubbed your hand together and ate that grain, you would be breaking the Sabbath law. They were to prepare all their food ahead of time before the Sabbath, and that would be breaking the Sabbath. And so this is the first time in Mark's gospel where the religious authorities directly confront Jesus. And they say, look, why are your disciples doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath? The harvesting. And I find it interesting how Jesus once again turns the tables on these religious leaders, right? And he says to them, have you not read? And then in their brain they're saying, of course we've read. We know the story from 1 Samuel 21, verses 1 through 6, that talk about David coming to Abiathar, is who Mark says. But actually, when you look at the story, which you will do after you watch this video, it's Ahimelech, and Ahimelech was Abiathar's father. And I don't want to go into the reasons why Mark might have gotten that changed. But we read the story in Ahimelech, and these religious leaders knew that story like the back of their hand. And Jesus brings it out. So what is it about that story? Well, David isn't king yet, and he's being pursued by Saul. And he ends up in the city of Nob. And the city of Nob, outside of Jerusalem, was the place where the tabernacle, temple's not built yet, but the tabernacle's there. And if you remember the tabernacle, you had the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies is where the Ark of the Covenant was. And outside of that was a curtain. And then on the other side of that curtain was the altar of incense, the prayers of Israel coming to God, and the lampstand on one side of that altar of incense. On the other side was a table, and on that table were 12 loaves of bread in 2 stacks of 6, and on top of each stack were incense burned, and that's called the bread of the presence. And the loaves reminded Israel of God's presence with them and their offering to God. And that bread that was there was to be only eaten by the priest. That's what who was lawful to eat. And on a side note, that meant that the priest actually got fresh bread every week. Most Israelites wouldn't have had fresh bread every week, but the priest did. God provided for them. So David comes to Nob, he and his men, and he asks Ahimelech for some food. And Ahimelech says, I don't have any. All I have is the bread of the presence. And he gives that bread to David, and David gives it to his men. And even Jesus acknowledges that wasn't lawful for him to do, but he did it anyway. And then in verses 27 and 28, Jesus makes a very important point. In verse 27, he says that the Sabbath is made for people, not people for the Sabbath. And I had you look at another Bible passage, this time from Deuteronomy chapter 5. And in that passage is again the giving of the commandment to keep the Sabbath day holy. But in verse 14, there's this emphasis that the manservant and the maidservant were also to benefit from not having any work. And it gives you the idea that the Sabbath was made for people. And the religious leaders should have understood that the Sabbath was made for people, not the other way around. Jesus uses that point to jump to the more important point, and that is that he is Lord of the Sabbath. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. That term Son of Man, you'll find it over 90 times in the book of Ezekiel. However, the more important passage is actually in Daniel. Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, where it becomes a key part of who the Messiah is going to be. And Jesus is claiming to be that Messiah, and the Messiah is Lord over all their Sabbath laws, over the Sabbath itself. So let's do our 3 takeaways from this story. Takeaway number 1, if we live by the law, we will continue to draw lines. We will be consumed with drawing lines. If we turn our faith in Jesus Christ into another law, we're finding out this is when I'm a good Christian, this is when I'm a bad Christian. And Jesus fulfilled the law for us, right? He came and fulfilled the law perfectly for us. All right, second takeaway. Every week, God invites us into his rest that involves the whole person, body and soul, spirit. God cares about us physically, he cares about us emotionally, he cares about us spiritually. And so the Sabbath is set up not just to stop working, but to refresh our souls. And that's what we try to do in worship every Sunday, is provide for your souls that rest and that joy and entering into the joy of the Lord. The third takeaway, Jesus is Lord of our laws as well, okay? And you think about the traditions of the elders. Jesus supersedes all the elders and laws of the elders, and he does for us too. Whatever laws we set up, Jesus is Lord over it. Why? Because he fulfilled all the law on our behalf. So that's my part. Now it's your part. Dig in deeper with the questions in your study guide, and God's blessings as you do so.